UFO sightings in America's Old West seem to occur over time in a series of strange waves. Following the California airship sightings, which ended in December 1896, after a brief pause of a few uneventful weeks, sightings of strange skycraft broke out in Nebraska in June 1897. Engine-driven balloon ships were then being developed, but they were still not widely used, being mostly in the experimental stage. The airships observed throughout the country in 1897 were a mysterious and unexplained phenomenon which even today are unable to be accounted for. The sightings began in Hastings, Nebraska on January 25, 1897, where witnesses told the Omaha Bee newspaper of a large glaring light moving with astonishing speed about 500 feet above the ground. The light was seen to circle around for several minutes, descend about 200 feet, then, still circling, travel swiftly for about 2 miles before slowing down to circle for a full 15 minutes. It then lowered and vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The Nebraska sightings continued into mid-March, the newspaper reporting that it initially had the appearance of an immense star, but on closer observation, its intense light revealed its colour to be artificial and illuminated by powerful electric dynamos in order to send forth such blazing wonder. In multiple accounts, stunned witnesses reported rumbling noises, strange voices, and even laughter from the strange objects in the air above them. The shape of the crafts observed ranged from conical, with wings and a rudder, to barrel-sized, but always with bright illumination like a big searchlight or train engine headlight in the sky. The rapidly moving UFOs started being seen in neighbouring Kansas, lighting up towns where they would come to a complete standstill in the sky for about 30 minutes before performing playful manoeuvres, then zooming out of sight. As the March 29th edition of the Kansas City Times noted, stars and planets do not perform these feats. By April 1897, the airship phenomenon was being witnessed in many other states, including Illinois, Michigan, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, and Texas. Metallic cigar-shaped craft with blazing headlights were seen throughout April in other areas of the Midwest and northern states. In addition, witnesses sometimes claimed to see and hear people aboard the mysterious airships, sometimes actually conversing with some of their occupants. All attempts to find information about one such self-described inventor later were unsuccessful, while other witnesses encountered UFO crews that did not seem quite human. On April 14th, near Reynolds, Michigan, a group of farmers viewed an airship landing in a field and then discovered inside it a 9-foot-tall humanoid. The Saginaw Courier-Herald reported their account that the being seemed to be trying to communicate with the onlookers, but that his speech sounded like bellowing. In another sighting on May 3rd near Cassville, Indiana, airship occupants were described as, quote, foreign-tongued midgets who also spoke no English. In a similar incident, a pilot described as clearly not an inhabitant of this world was retrieved from the wreckage of a crashed airship on April 17th in Aurora, Texas. It was by around the first week of June 1897 that the wave of airship sightings seemed to just stop, with very few reported after that. However, the many newspaper articles from that year confirm that something extremely unusual did occur, which unfortunately we may never find out about. The Aurora, Texas incident has since been examined and investigated with some intriguing ramifications. It was 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, April 17th, 1897, when the tiny town of Aurora, which is about 30 miles northwest of Fort Worth, was reportedly visited. A cigar-shaped UFO appeared suddenly in the sky above. A metallic silver in colour, the strange craft was moving from south to north and quite unlike the balloon airships of the time. Witnesses stated that the UFO was constructed from an unknown metal which resembled somewhat a mix of aluminium and silver, with one witness guessing that the ship weighed several tons. Given that the sighting occurred during a window of time when many strange airships were being spotted throughout the United States, it was called an airship in a newspaper article later penned by Aurora resident S.E. Hayden. Hayden wrote in the Dallas Morning News that the strange-looking craft appeared to be experiencing some kind of mechanical problems. Travelling due north, it seemed much closer to the Earth than others observed like it. The object slowed down to about 10 or 12 miles per hour and started to settle toward the ground. Hayden related that some early risers stared in amazement as the limping airship drifted over the town square and then continued north toward the property of Judge J.S. Proctor. Shockingly, the UFO then collided with a fast-moving windmill on the judge's property and shattered into pieces with a massive explosion, scattering debris across several acres of land, thus waking many more of the town's residents. The impact destroyed the windmill, the nearby water tank, and the judge's flower garden. It then became apparent that the explosion and crash had attracted many spectators to view the disaster site on Judge Proctor's land. In amongst the wreckage, the townspeople discovered the dead body of the UFO's pilot. At this stage, Hayden's account became very strange. Witnesses observed that the pilot, the craft's sole crew member, was not human. Hayden stated that although the pilot's body was severely injured in the crash, it was obvious that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Again, in keeping with common beliefs of the time, another witness claimed that the pilot may have been from Mars. This witness was a man named T.J. Weems, who was an officer in the US Signal Service and reportedly an authority on astronomy. In an earlier case of a UFO that had exploded in 1891 over Dublin, Texas, papers had been found bearing strange writing on them, and thus the same thing happened in Aurora. When the gathering townspeople checked the pilot's body, they discovered that he was carrying documents written in an unknown language. They guessed that the papers may have contained some record of the pilot's journeys, but as they were written in some unknown text like hieroglyphics, they were indecipherable and unable to be understood. After the crash, the local people tried to find out more about how the UFO had been constructed and what had made it fly. However, Hayden realised that the ship was too badly wrecked to come to any determination as to its construction or motive power. His Dallas Morning News article was published 2 days after the crash and said that the pilot's funeral had been arranged to take place on the following day, April 20th. Another newspaper, the Fort Worth Register, later reported the pilot, who was not an inhabitant of this world, was provided with a proper Christian burial at the Aurora Cemetery. When the pilot was laid to rest, a marker was placed on his grave. Nearly 80 years later, in 1973, a newspaper journalist named Bill Case described the marker as bearing a strange design which resembled a flying saucer with portholes. Case was an aviation writer for the Dallas Times-Herald and the Texas State Director of the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. Soon after he wrote the story describing the grave marker, it was stolen, so that today no one is sure exactly where the pilot was buried. In 2008, an unmarked grave dating back to the 1890s was found at the Aurora Cemetery, and this was during the filming of a television show called UFO Hunters, which was aired on the History Channel. It later became known that in the 1970s, people tried to exhume the remains of the alleged alien. However, local authorities had determined that a grave cannot be exhumed unless the next of kin is notified. The Cemetery Association was accordingly able to get a court injunction in 1972 to prevent anyone from exhuming the remains, while the owners of the cemetery have refused to allow anyone to dig up the grave. Therefore, nobody knows if that particular plot is the grave of the extraterrestrial pilot. Looking back on history, Aurora's population had drastically declined in the early 1890s due to an epidemic, while the town was bypassed by a major railroad. Therefore, some claim that the story of the UFO pilot has been fabricated by local residents to boost tourism. However, many others do believe that a spaceship crash-landed there, while in fact the Texas Historical Commission has placed a permanent marker at the cemetery entrance that mentions the aliens' aviation disaster. UFO hunters have confirmed the existence of Judge Proctor's well, while the UFO network has located 2 new eyewitnesses who were children at the time. An unmarked grave was also found at Aurora Cemetery using ground-penetrating radar and photos from previous visits in the area near other 1890s graves. A recent landowner has also provided pieces of retrieved metal containing mostly aluminium and also an unknown element. The case of the alien who fell from the sky in Aurora, Texas, continues to fascinate UFO researchers to this day. Although the cemetery marker calls the 1897 incident a legend, many have taken seriously the strange event and are still seeking answers to the puzzling accounts and evidence.